Sci-fi September is upon us, and I'm very excited because all of the fantasy channels that I watch on YouTube are suddenly reading and talking about science fiction. I love it! One of the fantasy channels that I've begun watching and I'm really enjoying, and there's some performance art involved in this, is the Book Buds. I've been tagged by the Book Buds, and I have to read this off of the phone. It's too late at night, I can't remember it, so I wasn't going to do this, but I'm just going to read off the phone. This is called the Fantasy... This is called the Fantasy... Jesus Christ. This is the Fantasy Character Trope tag, and this is from the Book Buds. I'm going to put a little image or a video here of these guys, so let's watch that for a second. And then let's watch it over here too, get a little bit more of a gist of the Book Buds as you hear me squeaking on this stool. I've got a case of the giggles here. Let's see if we can make it through this one, all right? So, first question is...
The Chosen One, a book you recommend to everyone.
I've got a number of selections for this one. Foundation is an obvious one because it's one of my favorites of all time. It's one of those ones that I think can impact the way you look at the world, and it can affect your life. I think Our Robot is like that too. I think it imbues in a young reader a sense of empathy and sympathy towards other people in a weird sort of way. But I'm going to go pretty literal on this, and just something I've been recommending a lot lately. Oh, you know what? I'm not going to recommend this, because I was going to recommend The Space Between Worlds, which was a really great book that I read this year. I think I've got that somewhere else, probably going to end up on this list. One that I used to recommend a lot, and it's a hard one to recommend because it doesn't represent me as a reader, and it was a real hit or miss. It wasn't like a slam dunk. It's just something weird and quirky. I read this book called Naive Super, and I believe it's either Finnish or I believe it's Norwegian. It's a Norwegian novel. So it's a translation. I believe the author's name is Erland Loe. Let's put that, let's see, I got some room right here. We've got that right here. So you can see the author's name there. I'm so great with video editing. But not so great with containing the giggles. Yeah, so check that one out. It's really weird. I think, God, it's been a long time since I read it, but it's like a young guy who's moving to maybe New York City. He's just got nothing going on in his life. He doesn't have any direction. He's got this little toy thing he plays with. It, just to even say it out loud, it doesn't sound like anything you'd want to recommend. I think it's such an easy read. It's really short. It's one of these things you can pick up and read 3 pages, put it down for a week, pick it up, read 3 pages, walk the dog, you read 3 pages, whatever. I think give it a chance. Either you're going to think, oh, I can't stand this character, DNF the book, fine, go ahead. Or maybe you read it and you're like, wow, that's something that really stuck with me for a while. And it stuck with me for a while after. I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing, but when a book has the power to stay with you, I feel like in hindsight it was a good thing to have read.
Okay, the second one, The Secret Heir. A book that surprised you turned out to be more than you expected.
The Secret Heir, for me, is Hyperion. Hyperion is not so much of a secret anymore. I think everybody has heard something about this book, and it's usually positive. When I first picked it up, it was on recommendation from a friend, one of the other trainers who works for me at the gym, and he likes science fiction too, and he said, you've got to read this. This is the best science fiction I ever read, and somehow it had escaped me for a while. So I picked it up last year, and I read it, and it's become one of my top 10, top 20 science fiction books of all times. It's a really, really great read. When I first picked it up, it's really hard to get into it initially, and I read about 50 or 60 pages of it. I lost the book, and I wasn't upset because I was like, okay, this is really going to be an adventure trying to find my way into this world and what's going on. The first part of it's called The Priest's Tale, and it's really confusing as sort of the horror aspect of the book. And when I decided that I wanted to pick it up again, I couldn't find it. So then I waited another 3 or 4 months, and that haunting story sort of stuck with me for a while. So when I thought about it, I said, let me just try to give this book another try. I was expecting it to be just like that the rest of the way through, just kind of a difficult read. I didn't think I was going to be like blown away by any kind of like, it didn't seem like it was going to be space opera or anything that threw a lot of heavy action at me. I was blown away by it. This book is phenomenal. It's unique in the genre. It's one of the best written books of all time that I've read. And I've read a lot of books. Just, I've got a video coming out soon that's going to be the top 150 science fiction reads. That's coming from me like sitting down and thinking about 400 or so science fiction books that I've read. So if I'm saying I think Hyperion's like one of the best I've ever read, I'm saying that in the context of having read a lot, not boasting about it, just giving that context. Hyperion by Dan Simmons.
All right, the next one. The Evil Overlord, a book that was poorly executed or a book that fell flat.
The Evil Overlord I'm going to talk about here, I feel like I've been slamming this book to death, and I don't really mean to slam it because all in all, it's a well-written book, but it disappointed. I had really high expectations. I did a book haul when I got the book in. It was Kazuo Ishiguro's Clara in the Sun. This is a book, it's really especially hard to talk about it now, and it's on my mind because I just did a review of iRobot. Right before this, I filmed an review of The Caves of Steel by Isaac Asimov. Both of these dealing with robots and AI and using them, examining humanity and what it means to be human, which is the attempt that Ishiguro made. And Clara in the Sun is, wholly inspired by one of the short stories in iRobot, which I don't know if Ishiguro says that it is, but it clearly is. Called Robbie. It's just a short story. And Isaac Asimov does in like 3 pages what Ishiguro tried to do in the whole novel. And while the story is really well told, I love Ishiguro's writing in other books. Boy, I can't even think of, I'm not thinking of The Remains of the Day. I'll think of it later. If I do, I'll mention it. If not, I'll just put it right here. This is the one I'm thinking of or not thinking of. But he's a great writer, but science fiction just might not be his genre, or it might have just been this book. A lot of people love this book, and that's great, so I'm glad that it got appreciation because it deserves appreciation for how well it is written, but in terms of the ideas and the attempt at examining humanity, I don't think it adds anything new, and it was really a letdown for me because it was something I really thought was going to be really good.
The next question. The Reluctant Hero, a book you're not sure that you want to read or not.
The Reluctant Hero. This may or may not be a different camera angle. I tried to match it perfectly. I had finished filming this video and then I played it back and the audio was mangled the rest of the way through, so I'm going to run through this again. My Reluctant Hero is either going to be Mistborn, the Wheel of Time series, or the Canterbury Tales. The Canterbury Tales obviously is different than those other two. I chose Canterbury Tales on this one because having read Hyperion and loved it so much, I know that there's a lot of parallels to Canterbury Tales and the ideas of the pilgrimage and following these different stories. I haven't read the Canterbury Tales full through. I've picked it up when I was younger and never made it through because I was a more immature reader at the time. So I feel like I want to pick that up and have that experience. I may or may not do that. Mistborn is one that's been recommended to me a lot. I watch a lot of fantasy booktube channels. I watch a lot of channels that are different than me. I do like to watch science fiction channels, but I only watch like 2 or 3, and there's 2 or 3 that I think are really good, and there's maybe another 2 or 3 that I enjoy as well. And I think all the ones I've seen are good. I think there's just some that speak to me more than others, but that's kind of the world I live in with BookTube. So I try to look at stuff that I don't have as much familiarity with, and I just get a lot of energy out of it. Especially I've been watching a lot of fantasy, some comics, some YA, even some cozy mystery and crime and horror and stuff like that. And I really get a lot out of that, and I feel like I'm in the conversation even though I don't know when I'm going to get around to reading those genres. I've read all of those genres a little bit, but certainly not as much as the people that are doing reviews on them. I like to watch reviews from people I purposely seek out from different countries, different races, different genders, people who look different than I look, and I think that helps me to become a more well-rounded social media user, devourer of books, bookish person. You choose any of those that you like. Never Let Me Go is the Kazuo Ishiguro book I was thinking about. It just came to me. Kazuo Ishiguro, Never Let Me Go. Really good read. Highly recommend it. I don't know, what was I talking about? Oh, Wheel of Time is another one. Wheel of Time, I don't know if I'll get into or not. That one appeals to me because I used to love like really, really long, in the vein of Ender's Game, Ender's Shadow series, like really long ones that are really good as they go on. And I get the sense that's what Wheel of Time is like too. Now that I do book reviews, my TBR list is so long, it's hard to put long series in. So I don't know when I'll get to that. I think I will eventually though, because I think it's something that I'll really enjoy because it does speak to me a little bit. It's fantasy, which is something I do want to try to get into. I think my first attempt at that's going to be Gideon the Ninth, which has also been heavily recommended to me. So we'll leave it at that.
The next one, The Lucky Novice. So a book that was a great debut.
My lucky novice is The Space Between Worlds by Micaiah Johnson. This was one of my favorite reads of 2021 as a new release in 2021. I think my two favorites of 2021 is probably The Space Between Worlds, followed closely by Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. Those are my two tops for the year. Space Between Worlds is interesting. It talks about multiple dimensions. The main character can traverse through these different worlds in the different dimensions, but only so long as her doppelganger doesn't exist in that world that she's trying to traverse to. Well, somebody's been offing her doppelgangers on these other worlds, and she has to kind of figure out the mystery of what's going on. There's some interesting characters. There's non-binary characters. There's good LGBTQ representation in this, which I like and is not really often seen in science fiction. So I'm really happy about that. But it's a really, really beautifully written book, and obviously Micaiah Johnson is a very talented author, and I really hope that she has something else in the works because I'm absolutely going to pick up whatever she comes up with next.
Next up, The Mentor, a book that is formative to your life.
In the mentor category, I'm going to go with Isaac Asimov's Foundation series and I, Robot and the Robot series. There's just something about Asimov's writing, whether it's the large galaxies and world building and millennia of time passage in the Foundation series and how brilliantly he writes that, the brilliant character of the villain, the mule. It's just such a big world and a big universe and expands over so much time that it is impactful, especially the first time I read it as a young person, in terms of like just reminding you that as big as like your own bubble feels and your world feels, it really does give you that sense of smallness in a healthy way, to say that there is a big universe out there and like all the things that we make such a big deal out of, and there are things that we do and they are big deals, but there are a lot of things that if we can put them in the context of time, passage of time in the greater universe, there is something profound in that. I, Robot's another one. Asimov writes robots as sympathetic, and I can't help but think that I feel my empathy. I'm a highly empathetic person. I feel sympathy like in ways that I physically feel it, and I know a lot of that has to do with just my life experience and how I was raised. But there's no doubt that I, Robot and his writing in the Robot series feeds that or matches with that really nicely. And I think it's actually a good book to recommend to young readers because I think it does bestow or help to cultivate a sense of empathy and a sense of goodwill towards others. How do we relate to others? How do we perceive those who are different from us, and how do we treat them? And I think there's valuable lessons in those books that are not direct, but are more subtle. And sometimes the more subtle are the things that plant the seeds that can grow into real life directing lessons.
All right, last question. The Animal Companion, the book that broke your heart or that makes you smile?
I have a few animal companion novels. The first one's literal. It's a boy having to put down his dog. Where the Red Fern Grows. I'm not a book person who I think can cry from a book. I can cry in a movie. A book, it's hard for me to do that. I can feel it though, and that was certainly one as a young kid. This was before I was really a reader. It was a book I had to read, but I read it and I really enjoyed it. But it certainly was one that gave me all the feels and the emotions. That would be one. And on the other side of it, on the happy, makes me smile side, I definitely have a few of those. One that immediately comes to mind is Dykernauts by Greg Egan. I love the work of Greg Egan. His stuff is not always that accessible. It's a real challenge, and I sometimes feel like I need a math degree or a physics degree to really appreciate and understand his books fully. If I was a smarter person, I would probably appreciate them more, but I appreciate them just fine. I really like his stories. Dicronauts is one of my favorites by him, and I think it's one of his least renowned, perhaps, or least well known. And it's just this really interesting story. They're on this hyperboloid world where there's 2 dimensions of space and 2 dimensions of time, unlike our world where there's 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time. And it directs a lot of the action in the story. They're the characters who are in this 2-dimensional world, and so they can only move forward and back. They can't rotate. So they can only see forward and back, east and west. But then they have these symbiotes, these siders, worm-like things that inhabit their skull, and they can ping using like echolocation to the north and south. So it gives them sort of a full 180 range of motion of being able to hear or see. And that's kind of interesting. And it's interesting because within each individual of the cider and the walker, there's 2 distinct personalities or 2 individuals within the one. And then when you get 2 of them together, there's 4, and just those relationships and how they connect with each other. It's a really wild story, and I recommend that to anybody who's willing to take the challenge of it. Abaddon's Gate, Caliban's War is another one. So I like the Expanse series a lot. It'll be in my top 150 science fiction books. It's not in my top 10, it's not in my top 20, but I do really enjoy it. There is a character in, it's not Abaddon's, well, she's mentioned in Abaddon's Gate. I'm doing a reread currently of all of the Expanse novels. It's in the second novel, which is Caliban's War. Avasarala, this character just gets me to smile. To me, this is one of like the really strong representations of a female hero in literature. You know, thinking back until all the way back to Ripley in Aliens, and even especially the screen performance of Sigourney Weaver in the role in the movie. Just like phenomenal feminist hero character. Avasarala is, obviously not as large of a character. She's one of the characters in the story, but she is just, she demands respect. She is leadership. She is the one that when she speaks, everybody listens. She's got this foul mouth, but it's not gimmicky. It's who she is, and she's this great character. And one of the things I love about this was I turned the show on for the first time the other day. I didn't actually want to watch the show until I got through my reread of all of the books. And I've never seen, I don't think, an ad for the show or anything like that. So I don't know who any of the characters are, even the main characters like Holden. I haven't caught anything. But I knew this show existed. So I turned it on the other night for the first time. When I was reading these books the first time, and then also this time, the character of Avasarala, I immediately had a picture. I pictured this woman in my head. And it was an actress who had a small role in the show 24. She had a very small role in one of the X-Men movies, one of the older X-Men movies. But in my head, I knew this was that character. And in the movie, that actress is the character. Now that's just like, it's not mind-blowing, but it's really wild that there's no way that I saw any part of this show to know that she was cast in it, and it's an obvious casting, so that's why it's not mind-blowing, but it's just really, really cool to see that somebody else recognized that is that character. And the actress who did, I only watched the first episode, but she, in like one scene, she's a scene stealer, just like in the book. Avasarala is an absolute scene stealer. She's the best thing about the whole Expanse series. Going with that. Now this is the part in the video where I'm supposed to tag somebody. I just did another tag the other day and hadn't done tags in a while, so I had a few people that I really wanted to get some tags in on, and so I didn't think about that for this one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tag at least 2 people, maybe 3, and I want to focus on people whose channels I haven't really interacted with, but I'm just starting to kind of become aware or starting to notice them, or that I really like them, and from a genre that's different from my own, not science fiction. So I'm going to tag this person. I don't know who it is yet, but when I'm sitting down in front of the computer, I'm going to figure it out. But here you can see a good chunk. So I'm going to actually do a nice, legitimate, introduction of them, and also of this person too. And while we're doing that and we're looking at all of this, please give a thumbs up for this video. please click subscribe. That definitely helps the channel. It just takes a second. Just click that subscribe. Click the notification bell. I release new content every Thursday at 1 o'clock, so YouTube will let you know if you've clicked that notification bell, and look out for my new content. I've got a bit of the giggles today, so the fact that I'm doing a tag today probably means one of the next videos you're going to see is probably one of my book reviews, and those are a lot more serious and a lot fewer giggles. So check that out, and definitely be on the lookout for my top 150 science fiction reads list. That's sort of a passion project, if I can call it that, because it's something where like I really sat down and I thought about like the 400 or more science fiction books that I can really kind of remember reading. There's at least 400 of them. And I didn't want to do a top 400 list. That would take me forever, and it's just not doable. But I also want it to be, I always try to be positive, even on my book reviews. Like any book review, any book, there's always going to be at least some positive in there. So I really wanted with this list, it has to be all positives. Like number 150 still has to be something like, I'm really like, oh, you should read this. This is a good book. And I have about 150 or 160 of those. So I narrowed the list to 150. And if I would gone down to 100, I would have been cutting out a lot of books that I really wanted to talk about. I did, and then what I did was, it's been like the last 4 or 5 weeks, I've been writing out reviews for each of these 150. Some of these books I've read more recently than others, so some were really hard to do. And what was even harder was I could write a lot about them, but then narrowing it down to like 3 or 4 sentences was tough. It was tougher than writing the actual whole review. But what I'm getting at is, if you watch this video and you're like, oh, I'm always looking for new science fiction recommendations and I always hear a lot of the same ones, you're probably going to see some of those on my list, absolutely. But it is a list of 150, and they're all ones that I think are really good and worth recommending. So I think if you look at this, there is going to be enough of a blurb that I say about each one that you'll get a little familiarity, and you might be able to decide like, oh, this is something I might add to my list. And who knows, maybe you find a book that you really love just because you took the time to subscribe, click the notification bell, and yeah, those are the only two things that you have to do. Thank you for watching today. I'm Michael Leverts. This is Fit to be Read. Thank you.